This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers.
Dreamcast, up to 6 billion players.
Welcome back to the stage of history.
Why don't we play together?
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Please stop this disc now.
Hello and welcome to the Dreamcast Junkyard DreamPod episode 68. I'm your temporary host Lewis, and this is my first time hosting. I can't believe the guys at the Junkyard entrusted me with this much responsibility, but here I am feeling a little nervous, but at the same time I'm extremely excited because today we have a very spooky episode for all of you. As we'll be discussing Dreamcast horror games. But not just any horror games, these are your favourite horror games. When I say you, I am referring to the 165 people who voted in our poll that we put out on Twitter and Facebook asking, what is your favourite horror/horror themed Dreamcast game? But before we get into which games were voted for as your favourites, I'm going to introduce the gang I have assembled with me today. We are recording this on the eve of Shenmue 3's release, so spirits are high, and some of us, I think probably all of us, have actually got our copies a day early, so I appreciate the guys for putting up with this. We dragged them away from Shenmue 3. I dragged myself away from Shenmue 3. So without further ado, we've got first up is Mike. He is a long-time podcast attendee and the absolute champion behind the Dreamcast Junkyard's A to Z of Dreamcast games. Say hello, Mike.
Hello, Mike. And hello, Lewis.
Hello. Good to have you on again. Next, we've got Mark. All of my retro gaming heads who frequent the YouTubes may best know him as the man behind the MAZ Gaming YouTube channel and the controversial owner of one specific Dreamcast 2 branded Nintendo Switch. Say hello, Mark.
Hi mate, yeah, thanks for the intro. Yeah, I got a lot of love for that and a little bit of stick as well. So yeah, you know what, I'll take that. That's fair enough.
All right. Well, last but certainly not least, we have Andrew Dickinson. He is the writer of the upcoming Dreamcast Year 1 book that was successfully kickstarted back in April. So congratulations again for that. He is returning to the podcast after previously appearing as a guest on episode 66. So say hello, Andrew.
Hello, thanks for having me again.
Good to have you back. So it's tradition around here to go around in a circle, in this case more of a metaphorical circle as we are, communicating from all over the UK. And we're going to talk about what we've been up to recently, what games we've been playing, whether they're on the Dreamcast general retro systems or even new systems. Going in the same order as before, we'll start with Mike. Mike, what's been happening in your life? What have you been playing? And is it Shenmue 3?
It'll be Shenmue 3 from tomorrow, I can tell you that now. I've actually been replaying Shenmue 1 and 2. I completed Shenmue 2 in, I can't think when it was, I think it was like last October, for the first time ever. So I'm replaying it. The Shenmue 3 is kind of a little bit earlier than I thought it was going to be. So I've been playing that. I've also been playing Outer Worlds, which was on the Game Pass on the Xbox One, a fantastic game. And I've been playing a few Switch games, Luigi's Mansion 3, still playing Witcher 3 on the Switch, a couple of downloadable titles as well, things like Wargroove I'm still playing. And apart from that, it's non-game related, but it is Dreamcast related. I've had a bit of a barren spell in terms of buying stuff for Dreamcast, and I picked up a Game Classics action figure of Beat from Jet Set Radio. Which is literally now my pride and joy. It looks absolutely wonderful on my shelf, which is where most of my games sit most of the time, to be fair.
We saw that. We saw the figure, actually. It was on the Dreamcast Junkyard Twitter retweeted it. Yeah. And I think a lot of people were very impressed by that. They wanted to know where you got it from. Was it quite a rare find for you?
I haven't seen one on eBay for quite a while. I think it came out, possibly 2017, might have been early 2018, but it wasn't particularly expensive. I think it was around £40 when it first came out. I've seen them on a couple of listings going for like £200. I don't think they've sold, to be honest with you. This one cost less than £40. It was an absolute bargain. Dreamcast figures are a sort of a weird niche that I have in my collection. I've got about 60 now of different Dreamcast games figures. I've actually got another Ooh La La figure coming as well, which I've bought this week. So that's a bit crazy. But no, it's a really good figure. Really, I haven't opened the box obviously because I'm not insane. But it's a really good sort of action figure. It has a sort of a Dreamcast aesthetics. It's not sort of overly rounded. It's still a little bit sharp and a little bit angular. So it looks really, really good. And the box design is just fantastic. So hopefully that poster has inspired some people to look out for it, and hopefully people won't going to spend a huge amount of money buying it, because although it's cool, it's never cool enough to do that. I'll also do one last thing as well. The weird sort of circular thing of Dreamcast. I bought some American games on eBay last week, trying to fill some holes in my Dreamcast collection, because as regular listeners will know, I'm going for a full worldwide set. I've got about 100 Dreamcast American games to go. So I've picked up a few games, and it just so happened that the games I bought them from, the guy I bought them from, is someone I've known for 21 years. Didn't know he was into Dreamcast, didn't know he was into Sega. Used to go to punk gigs with him. Actually, a friend of his actually wrote in the fanzine I used to be in. So just randomly sort of picked this guy. Bizarre sort of thing. He messaged me back saying, "Are you such and such person?" I wasn't the person he thought I was. So I then messaged back saying, "I'm not, but I think I know who you are anyway." And the post went on, I think it went on RLLM UK, so it got quite popular on that, I think. That was sort of a weird circular thing. My entire life seems to be revolving around sort of coincidences through the Dreamcast, which is weird.
That's not a bad thing, really.
and then to make it the coincidence even worse, when I actually got the Beat figure, I noticed that the actual postcode was the exact same as the guy I bought the games from. It was the same street, a different address. So it really has been a puzzling week for me.
Yeah.
So there you go.
that is a story, and I suppose when you are the A to Z of Dreamcast games writer, you will stumble upon many Dreamcast coincidences at least some point. Yeah.
I do get quite a few people, if I buy games, I do get some people like sort of say, "Did you do the Dreamcast Junkyard A to Z?" which is quite cool. It's it's a tiny book really to go out there, but it's good that people are reading it. And one thing I've always championed is sort of trying to get a good Dreamcast library together. I know Andrew's book's coming out. I'm looking forward to that massively. We've got another Dreamcast book coming out quite soon. I think there's a Dreamcast book released in Spain, which I think someone pointed out as well on Twitter. So the library is growing, which is fantastic.
So just quickly before we move on to Mark, Mike, are these American Dreamcast games that you're looking for? Are you getting duplicates if you have them in like the European version? So are you getting every single version of every game, or are you just getting the ones that are exclusive to America and never came out in Europe?
Basically, I used to have a massive retro games collection of all different types of consoles. The space wasn't really there anymore, so I wanted to try and concentrate on one thing because I wasn't playing much, and Dreamcast was my main thing. So I only buy Dreamcast stuff now, and I've got a full PAL set. I've got just 3 Japanese games to go of the exclusive Japanese games. I've already got all the American exclusives and all the American games that were released in Japan but not in PAL. So this is just literally filling the holes in. They're quite cheap, you know what I mean? You can get most games under a tenner. It's, I suppose it's a little bit superfluous in terms of I've got the PAL version already, but I'm also buying things like the French versions and German versions of games. So I think the word to describe me is insane.
No, we are all passionate about the Dreamcast here, so you're in good company, don't worry. Right, Mark, what have you been up to? What have you been playing, whether it be new Dreamcast or old,
Yeah, so nothing quite as extravagant as that, really. But so I similar to Mike, I went back and got Shenmue 1 and 2. I kind of restarted that a few months ago just with the anticipation of Shenmue 3 coming up. I've absolutely nowhere near completed 1 and 2, but that's mainly because I probably get an hour a day max I can really do gaming by the time I get in from work and stuff. So yeah, it's been I kind of forgot how much of a long old slog it is, but that's not a complaint because obviously they're fantastic games. So yeah, it's just a case of getting through them. But yeah, I'm going to be jumping straight onto Shenmue 3 pretty much directly after this call. So look forward to that. Other than that, I've managed to pick up a copy of Gauntlet Legends on the Dreamcast, I already had a disc only Gauntlet Legends, but that game is unbelievably expensive in the UK. I have no idea why it's so expensive because I had it as a kid and I thought it was quite common, but trying to pick it up in the UK is really, really difficult at the moment. So that was nice to get a kind of perfectly boxed one that was really, really lovely. And in terms of more Dreamcast stuff, so I was at Play Expo Blackpool a few weeks back, and there was loads of awesome Dreamcast stuff there. So there wasn't many consoles to pick up, but in terms of like games to play, I got everyone on Choo Choo Rocket. So we had like 8 of us just like taking it in turns on Choo Choo Rocket, kind of winner stays on kind of thing, and that was awesome. So yeah, like lots of love for the Dreamcast with that stuff.
What happened to the original copy of Gauntlet Legends?
So I don't know. It kind of between moving houses. I'm talking years and years and years ago. I lost the entire copy, so like disc and case, and then I managed to pick one up online for about £1 that was disc only, and the disc worked. So I was like, oh, for £1 that's fair enough because normally it's like 60, 70 quid that I was seeing for the full set, and then I managed to pick one up for 20 quid recently. So for that price. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll happily do that. But yeah, Mike, mate, just any idea why it's so expensive, mate? Obviously, as the encyclopedic Dreamcast guy.
I think it's just one of those games which is not that common. I think it's sold particularly well outside.
Yeah.
I think the American version is also quite expensive as well, if I remember rightly. It's been a while since I've gone for it, but I think a lot of trends on eBay, especially in the last year, it seems a lot of the American games that are really quite expensive have suddenly become expensive for the PAL versions as well. So I think people are sort of checking eBay, but not quite sure how to check eBay properly, so they're sort of checking US listings as well. I'm not entirely sure. It's a weird thing with quite a few games. I've noticed things like what I noticed the other day had gone really expensive. I know Dynamite Cop's been quite expensive for quite a while, but I actually was looking through my Amazon, because most of my Dreamcast PAL games I bought from Amazon back in 2010, I suppose. And I actually looked through. And in 1 month I bought like 50 games, and the total cost was £65.
Oh wow!
I know that the prices have gone up after doing the A to Z. I sort of kept track of the prices, but some of the games it seems to be random which games are expensive, which games aren't.
Yeah, definitely.
I think I was probably buying games back then, and I can tell you the prices have definitely gone up. Two of the games on this list today, the horror games, we'll get to them, but yeah, they're ones that I remember checking them a while back and getting them when they were still fairly cheap, and now they've kind of skyrocketed. So last but certainly not least is Andrew. So how are you doing, Andrew? What you been up to? What you been playing?
I'm good. I mean, what have I been up to? I've been, and I mention this all the time, so I'm on the Switch Island podcast, which I think we talked about last time I was on, and basically every time I'm on, I mention that I've been made redundant, because that's what's happened in the last few weeks. So currently I'm out of work, which is fine, because it means I can concentrate on other things, like the book, finally getting to grips with that properly. But it also means I've got more time for gaming, which is great, and I've been mostly concentrating on more modern stuff. So I got Death Stranding a week or so back when it launched. I've managed to play like an hour of it, and then my partner got hold of it and now won't stop playing it. So I've seen more of it than I probably should have done. He's hours and hours and hours into it. Loves it. I didn't think he would. So I got that, and also I got Pokemon Shield the other day.
Nice.
So I've been playing a bit of that, and obviously Shenmue 3 today. And we were talking about, I think, before we started, a little bit about the graphics and stuff of Shenmue 3, and I couldn't help but kind of, when I streamed Shenmue 3 today on YouTube, and as I was playing, I was kind of like marveling at how amazing it looked. And I think half of that was because I'd come off playing Pokemon Shield, which is a nice game, but also has its share of flaws. So I was kind of like, you get people popping in from a distance. It's really, really obvious pop in, and then you look at Shenmue 3 and it's just like practically flawless in most ways. I mean, yeah, it still has its issues, but it looks amazing. So yeah, I mean, those are what I've been playing. Bit of Death Stranding, bit of Pokemon Shield, and about 3.5-4 hours of Shenmue 3 today.
Oh, that's awesome. It sounds like there's a good selection of really great new games coming out right now, really.
Yeah.
As for myself, I recently in Manchester, I attended the Doki Doki Japanese Culture Festival. It's kind of a small festival, but I made it a habit to go every year. They just have everything from Japanese food and anime goods and game stuff. And I went there this year and I didn't really get too much. It felt a little bit like there wasn't as many stalls as there had been in previous years. I did see some virtual on figures and I was going to buy them, but then I forgot about them. And as soon as I got home, I was gutted. I was like, why did I not? But I've always wanted to get virtual on figures because I love the designs of that game. In a way, there's something more unique to them about them, more than Gundam or another one of those kind of like mech figures. But yeah, so I'm really gutted I missed them. I might check on eBay later. Now I've reminded myself of this. Also, I don't know if you guys are familiar with these people, but there is a guy every year who brings along a load of different retro game consoles. It's the Knights of Retro Gaming. You may have heard of him maybe through being around the scene in Manchester. So he brought the Neo Geo CD and the PC Engine, and he brought a lot of other stuff, but those things were like must plays. I do not own either of them. Yeah. I'm pretty sure, I don't know if any of you guys own either of those consoles, but they're kind of maybe a bit harder to get hold of these days. So I was quite excited to play them. Played Bomberman on the PC Engine 4-player, which is a really nice experience. Exactly. Although I think Controller 4 didn't work, and I told the guy as like a fellow retro gamer, I was like, look mate, the A button on your fourth controller doesn't work, and I was kind of worried he thought that I'd broken it, but it wasn't me, honest. It was like that when I found it.
That's what they all say.
As for games I've been playing, I'll just quickly list some off. I recently played and completed Catherine, which is like an Atlas puzzle game. I played the original on the PS3. The new version, it's called Catherine Full Body, is like a really great update to it. It made a lot of my issues with the first game go away, and I've really enjoyed playing this new version of it. Also been playing Code Vein, which is this new Bandai Namco kind of anime Dark Souls. Me and my friend have been having a lot of fun playing that together. Really fun, kind of difficult, but you kind of get past anything if you put your heads together and really strategize. So that's a lot of fun. I definitely recommend that. And then the other game I've been playing, other than Shenmue 3, which I received today, is a game that we are going to be discussing today. It's actually the first time I've ever played it. I've had it for a while, but I thought, you know what, there's no better time than now to recording this podcast to actually play this game so I can actually talk about it properly as opposed to just giving sort of a half, speech about it. So when that game comes up, I will just talk about it then. So, right. So, as I explained, the community voted for their favourite horror/horror-themed games on the Dreamcast. So that means anything from a traditional survival horror game to a game that isn't necessarily intended to scare, but still features kind of supernatural or grotesque themes. So we're going to get into the results right now, and I'm going to tell you the winner. The guys here already know what it is, but let's all act surprised anyway. The winner with 32.3% of the vote is Resident Evil Code Veronica.
So shocked.
Fantastic game.
I think some people on our Twitter were basically like, yeah, it's Code Veronica. Like, what? Because we put out a little question, like, who do you think got the top spot? And everyone's like, yeah, it's Code Veronica. So it's obviously quite expected. And the Dreamcast is home to a lot of horror games, but it's also home to Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. But what is it about Resident Evil Code Veronica that makes it really stand out ahead of those games? And in the case of this poll, all Dreamcast horror games. Andrew, I want to just pick on you for a second, because I believe Code Veronica might have been the game that made you actually want a Dreamcast originally. Is that correct? Yes.
Yeah.
What is it about this game that resonated with you and seems to have resonated with everyone else so much?
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, it was the fact that it was the first fully 3D Resident Evil game. They'd utilized the power of the Dreamcast to, do away with the pre-rendered backgrounds and make it a completely 3D game, which was, I think, what drew a lot of people in was that newness about it. It's kind of, you had Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3. They all had the pre-rendered backgrounds. You kind of knew what to expect when you were going in. It was in terms of how it looked and kind of how it played, whereas kind of bringing it to fully 3D realm, there was so many different things they could do with it. So yeah, for me, I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. It's what got me into proper gaming. For me, I think we spoke about it. I think when I was on episode 66, that was my reason for buying the Dreamcast originally, and I definitely wasn't disappointed with it. It's an absolutely phenomenal game. I think the graphics drew people in because it was so different from a Resident Evil game. But I think once you actually were on board with it, it did a lot of other things differently as well. It kind of took a different tack with story. It was very different in terms of some of the gameplay mechanics. It just overall was a really good horror game that knew how to kind of weave a story. It knew how to kind of play on your emotions, and it knew how to make you jump. There were so many jump scares in that game. They were all brilliant. But yeah, it's just a really, it deserved to be number one. Basically, it is an all-around masterclass in horror gaming, I think.
That is a definitely a very passionate review of this game. And Mark, you kind of piped up when we mentioned the winner. So, Mark, what is it about this game that you love so much?
Do you know what? It's kind of similar to what was just said, really. So I loved Resident Evil 1 and 2, especially on PS1, and then kind of just seeing the kind of before launch, like in the magazines and things, and you was kind of like, oh my god, this looks amazing. And it was kind of the next generation of kind of what you wanted from that. So obviously all the graphics had massively improved, like you say, completely just taken advantage of the Dreamcast power. And it was the closest to kind of like Hollywood game, Hollywood horror that you'd really seen. Because I mean, the PS1 and that, although it was, there is some very, very scary moments in, especially Resident Evil 2, where there's some real amazing jump scares. But it's obviously it brings it to life a lot more, when the graphics are a little bit better, and you can kind of see what's going on a little bit more. Because looking back, if you play Resident Evil 1 now, the graphics are a little bit jarring, and it's quite hard to kind of get fully into it. But whereas Code Veronica kind of still holds up pretty well today, I'd say. I play it probably 2 or 3 times a year and complete it, or I'll get as close as I can to completing it at least. And it's just one of them games where even going back now, it's still just as good as it was even then. Like, it doesn't really suffer from any of that, just because they really had kind of used the power of the Dreamcast. And a lot of the, I think, I'm not sure you might just mentioned there, but a lot of the kind of cinematic kind of sequences and the CGI sequences and things like that was such a step up as well, and just kind of added to it. So there's a very, very good opening sequence I remember. With that one, and it's just like it was literally just the first 2 on crack, basically. Just kind of turned up to 11 with the power of the Dreamcast behind it, and it was just everything that I think people was kind of crying out for, really.
Okay, so Mike, what are your thoughts on Code Veronica?
So I'm not the biggest Resident Evil fan in the world. In fact, I really don't like Resident Evil games a huge amount. But Code Veronica is, you can't, even if you don't like the actual series, you can't deny how good it is as a game. I think it's amazing as well how, in this era where everyone sort of moans about people having stretched ratios and, different outputs in their TVs for Dreamcast games, and how you must have DCJY for this and that for that. That actually, this is one of the games where the PAL versions still not compatible with VGA. So a game which is sort of doesn't even take use of the great power that the Dreamcast had in PAL territories. Luckily, the American version is actually pretty cheap to buy in this country anyway, so it's quite a cheap game to buy. And of course, we can't forget as well that in Japan they had the enhanced version released as well for Resident Evil, Biohazard, Code Veronica, the same that was released later on the PS2. It's a really good game. I love horror as an actual theme. I'm a massive horror fan. I've never really got into Resident Evil because I was a PC gamer when the first 2 came out, and sort of the static screen approach didn't ever really do it for me. But Code Veronica is just it's genuinely unnerving as a game, which is great. It's got great direction. The engine looks fantastic, and it's just a really good, solid video game.
Just a quick aside, Mike. Do you have the limited edition Code Veronica Dreamcast, the kind of crimson red one?
So there's 2, I believe. There's a Stars one, which is it black or blue? I think it's black, the Stars one, and the Claire Redfield one, which is red. I have not got either of them. I've not even started trying to get limited edition ones yet because I'm not made of money. But it looks fantastic. Yeah, there's a couple of obviously the limited edition game. I've got that one, so obviously it's not really limited edition at all. It's just in a red slipcase with a little little metal plaque that comes with it. I've got that one, which is quite cool. But yeah, the console itself. I mean, if anyone does have one, respect, because it's a fantastic console.
It does look really nice. I want to ask really because I think myself, I have played this game very briefly. I've not played it enough to really give it, a good enough review. I thought it was really cool from what I played. But I want to ask to you guys who have played it properly, because it sounds like you guys, when you first played it, you were very brought in by how good it looked and how cinematic it was. So what I want to ask now is, with all the Resident Evil games, good and bad, that have come since, how does this one still hold up compared to those? Like, how does it still get remembered for being so good?
That's a good question. It's one of the only Resident Evil games that hasn't really had a proper remake as such. I mean, Resident Evil 3 as well, obviously, but you've got the Resident Evil 1 remake. Now they've got the Resident Evil 2 remake. The big games have had a remake, and this one hasn't. And if you want to buy it now, you can get it on PSN and Xbox One, but it's the very old kind of port to Xbox 360 or PS3 that they did, kind of shoehorned onto modern consoles. So I think that one of the reasons it's remembered fondly is because it's remembered as it was, to a degree, where you're not remembering the remake of it. You're not remembering some of the version of the game anymore. You're remembering the original, and it has the same power that it had back then. I mean, I remember coming out of the very first area, and you're in the prison, and you come out, and the first area you go into is a graveyard. And I think it was the first time in the series, and I'm not sure they've done it since, where you actually had zombies coming out of graves, out of the ground, and it's it's terrifying, and kind of tripping over them, and there's that whole cutscene where she's tripping over and terrified, and it's that I think it's partly to do with the fact that people are remembering it as it was rather than what it's become now, and also the fact that it was doing a lot of things different that the series hadn't done before, and I don't think that they've done them since. Resident Evil has abandoned everything that the original games were, and Code Veronica was almost like the original, the original trilogy, as it were. But as Mark said, kind of hyped up to 11, and games since then have taken a completely different tack. And so I think people remember Code Veronica fondly because it was the best of the original games in a proper 3D format.
From what I remember, I think it was supposed to be Resident Evil 3, but then they just released the other one instead because they had so many going on in development. From what I remember, I feel like I heard that somewhere.
It sounds about right. I couldn't say for sure, but that does sound right. Yeah.
Do you guys have any more to add to that question, or just anything about Code Veronica in general, really?
Well, I was just going to say, just kind of adding on to what was said, then I think because the Dreamcast user base was obviously a lot smaller than the PS1, for example, there's a lot of people who haven't really played this one. So I've got friends who are quite big into gaming who probably wouldn't even really know what Code Veronica was, just because they weren't particularly into Dreamcast at the time. And like you say, it's not really had the same legacy in terms of like remakes and kind of successive ports and things like that. So it's a bit of a shame, really, because I mean it's genuinely a fantastic game. I'd love to see a full on port to modern consoles, but then again, I'm sure there's other ones that probably might kind of have their hand up first for that kind of thing. But yeah, it's honestly, I think people have really missed out on that, unfortunately.
Well, Capcom, if you're listening. To be honest,
they are.
I think if they did re-release it, I think probably we would suddenly learn of. I mean, we already can see from the votes that a lot of people really like it. But I think a re-release would really kind of bring it into the forefront of modern gaming. Really, I think people would really pick this up and embrace it like you guys all did when you first played it. So, yeah, Code Veronica, well deserved. So, are we okay to move to number 2?
Let's do number 2.
Let's do it.
Number 2. Okay, so with 13.4% of the vote, so we're getting much lower now. Illbleed.
Yes.
So we're getting some positive sounds from Mike there. So, thing is, unlike Code Veronica, Illbleed is kind of more misunderstood, I'd say.
Insane
Yes.
is the word you're looking for.
Yes. So this is the game that I mentioned I've been playing recently, in anticipation for the podcast. I've had it for a while. Tom Charnock actually sold me his copy. And my review of it is that it is essentially a survival horror version of Minesweeper. Can anyone agree?
Wow.
You're not far off.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so this was released in Japan and America, but we didn't get it here in Europe. So, I mean, Mike, you've obviously played it. What about you, Mark and Andrew? Have you played this one?
So I haven't. No, it's one that I very much know of, and I've seen a lot of videos on. And obviously, I kind of go deep into Dreamcast research just generally, just because I'm just one of those people. So I mean, yeah, I've pretty much probably seen a full playthrough, but I've never actually had the opportunity to play it myself.
And what about you, Andrew?
No, very similar. I've not played it. It was one of those that I saw at the time in magazines, and I was like, oh, I hope that comes to Europe. And of course, it was never to be. And it kind of dropped off my radar after that. So I haven't really looked at it since. But I do remember it looking extremely bizarre in the magazines at the time, and definitely wanting to try it out, but just never have had the opportunity to.
It is insane, as Mike said. Basically, the plot focuses around the daughter of this maniac who makes these horror attractions, and you see this like introduction where this backstory, like he tested these horror attractions on his daughter. It is quite dark, but the way it's presented is just super ridiculous and campy. Yeah, and all these different attractions that he would make end up being in this big theme park called Illbleed. And so her friends go to this theme park to win some prize money. She doesn't want to go because she's like, no, I don't want anything to do with that, because of my past. And yeah, so she goes then to the theme park after her friends don't turn up for ages. And she has to go through all of these different attractions that are based on these kind of different fictional horror B movies. Like the first one's called something like Home Run of Terror or something like this. Home Run of Death or something. So it is a big tribute to those old naff B movies. And why I kind of say it's like Minesweeper is that the gameplay revolves around going through these attractions in a third-person view, and you basically have to locate where a trap might be that's going to shock you, and you have to mark it. And if you successfully mark it, you get adrenaline back. But the thing that makes it quite complicated and quite polarizing, I think, is that you have to micromanage 4 different stats. You've got adrenaline, bleeding, heart rate, and health. And if one is like too low or too high in the case of some of them, you end up being in a bit of a predicament. So, yeah, it can be a little bit of a weird game to kind of get your head around at first. But I think now I've finally sort of got to grips of how it all works, I'm really enjoying it. So, Mike, do you want to give me some comments on this one?
I think just trying to describe Illbleed and not trying to come across as like an insane person is difficult, because it's if you love B movies, which I do, and you love old school horror like I do, it's just, and you like Shenmue, and I'm going to describe why in a minute. It's a perfect game because it's just insane. so many nods to classic horror films. There's so much love for B-movie films, but through a Japanese lens. So it's that slightly from a different culture looking at American horror films. And it's just really don't come into expecting sort of like Japanese horror, which would make this game, I think, literally terrifying. It's very much American B-movie slasher films, and it's not the easiest game in the world to control. I think it's fair to say. It's got some problems, which is why I compare it to Shenmue 4. There are obvious flaws in the game, but the utter surrealness of everything, and there's just the complete I don't know what I'm looking for. It's almost like it's written by someone who is just a love letter to horror films, a love letter to horror, the genre. It's, for me, the best horror game on the Dreamcast, not because it's the best game, because it's certainly not the best game, but it's just fantastic for people who love horror, and is just weird.
That is pretty much Illbleed in a nutshell. Even the voice acting in it is pretty bad, but in kind of like a really lovable way. Do you know what I mean? Like the kind of way Shenmue is. The gameplay, like I say, is certainly unique. I found it to be slightly frustrating in places. Like, so basically you have to scan the room, you have to pick out the trap.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll mark it, and then I'll sort of walk forward, and then like something on my left which I didn't notice or I didn't point out before, will catch me out. And I think maybe that's just kind of because I'm a bit of a newbie at this game. But as I got more into it, I really enjoyed it. And yeah, it's just completely bonkers, really. And it's weird. It's just weird. Like, you come into the game and you're there, and it doesn't really kind of explain what anything is. There's kind of a tutorial that's a bit vague. Definitely, like, maybe look at a guide or something if you're going to play it, but it's one of the more unique experiences that the Dreamcast has to offer.
There are some really good guides out there as well. There's a really good guide for the Japanese version, which I don't think there's any difference between Japanese version and American version, but I played the Japanese version, and it's got a fantastic guide out there. I also will mention as well, it's the only game that had a release in Taiwan. For Dreamcast. So there's a cardboard boxed version, an official version as well. The only I say the only version in Taiwan, obviously I'm guessing that they had lots of other games released there as well, but it's the only game which had a specific boxed version that I know of. So a little boxed version with a calendar inside it as well, which is a cool little thing if anyone finds it.
Well, I just want to, before we move on to number 3, I just want to mention I read a Gamer Sutra probably, article a little while back, even before I played this game, because I always had an interest in getting it, and Tom obviously was nice enough to sell me his copy. So this article is about the guy behind Illbleed and Blue Stinger, Shinya Nishigaki, and I don't know, I feel like Illbleed and Blue Stinger are one of those games where the man behind it is quite important. So like Shenmue, for example, Yu Suzuki is obviously synonymous with Shenmue. And in this article, you learn a lot about Shinya Nishigaki and about Illbleed. And it's quite a sad article because he kind of really had this big vision for games even after Illbleed, but unfortunately, because Illbleed sold so badly, it was released at the tail end of the Dreamcast's life in North America. It was never released in Europe. No one really got it at the time. And it kind of just came out, wasn't really appreciated, didn't sell very well, definitely compared to Blue Stinger. Nice. Yeah, and his company kind of, closed its doors. And that was really the last of him really releasing games. And unfortunately, sorry to bring this on a sort of more somber note here, he did pass away in 2004 at the age of 42. So when you play Illbleed, we really need to appreciate Shinya Nishigaki and the vision he had for this ridiculous game. So let's all give a hand to him. So if you haven't seen that article, definitely check it out, because I probably made it sound really depressing and sad, but it is a really great article. It's a great interview with him. You learn a lot about him and the games he developed. So yes, moving on, we have D2. So this is another game that never was released in Europe. It was an American and Japanese release, and that got 10.4%. And another game that I believe polarizes people, just like Illbleed, if not maybe more so, probably because it was a little bit more picked up compared to Illbleed. A lot more people probably got this. And I think it's personally a well-deserved entry on this list. And in a way, it's probably more than a horror game for me. It's probably one of my favorite games on the Dreamcast. I'll probably get into why in a bit. So, guys, who's played D2? Mike?
Yes.
You have played it.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. It's a great game. I'm a big fan of D on the Saturn. One of my favourite Saturn games. A bit of a weird game, but it's a very similar story, actually, in terms of the creator to Illbleed, isn't it? Because yeah. So it's a bit of a sad story again, but fantastic game. It's got that Shenmue effect. I like to say the Shenmue effect, where the game has got obvious flaws, but we love it because it's just really weird. It's really cool. Really good acting. For some reason, I found the actual script and the actual storytelling in D2 to be actually quite cool.
Yeah, I agree.
It's sort of weird. A lot of games have a really poor. In fact, the first two games we've spoken about haven't had the greatest storylines, but this is a really, really good storyline. It tries to mix lots of genres, and it doesn't really work for me overall. But actually, it's just a lot of fun.
Okay, so Mark, have you played D2?
So again, unfortunately, no. So I've never had an American Dreamcast, but again, it's one of them games that I know. I mean, I've seen people play. I've got friends who've played it, and I've seen them play it without ever really having the chance myself. But from what I've seen, it certainly looks impressive. Obviously, I wish I could contribute a bit more to this one, but it's one of them that it's kind of always been on my list of games that I would love to fully get my hands on and really explore. But yeah, it's just kind of I've not really had the chance so far.
All right, well, one day when we meet up for that beer, Mark, I will lend you my copy.
It's happening, mate. So, like, the only weird little thing I know about it, because I've recently got a 3DO, so I've been going deep into 3DO stuff, and the successor is that it was supposed to be a launch title for the successor to the 3DO, which obviously never kind of saw the light of day. It's quite an interesting piece of kind of gaming history that that kind of was what they were going to kind of put their flag on, really, or certainly one of the games they were going to put their flag onto.
I think it was quite a lot different, wasn't it? I think the shots from what they released. I think they did release some shots of the game on the M2, but I think it was quite a lot different. I think they completely reworked it for the Dreamcast. So it would be really interesting to see what would have happened. So I'm a big 3DO fan myself as well, and I think that console is one of my biggest lost opportunities in the 90s. I think it would have been a fantastic console.
Yeah, agreed, mate. Absolutely.
I think the original was supposed to be like Laura, who's the main character of D2. Her son, who's unborn, becomes the main character. And he's like in a castle and he has a sword, and that was all I remember. So yeah, we're talking about some pretty interesting minds with some of these games today. Kenji Eno is the man behind D2. Andrew, have you played D2?
I have, and I really don't know where to start with it, because it's one of those games that there's so much to talk about, because like Mike said, it's kind of a mixture of genres, and because it's a mixture of genres, there's just so many different elements that you could talk about. And not only that, you've got the story, you've got the the fact that it's Kenji Eno, and the fact that he unfortunately died. It was his last big game, and the whole the fact it was kind of the last of, was it Enemy Zero, D and D2 were kind of almost part of the same universe, as it were. They used the same digital actress, in inverted commas, that Kenji Eno was really up on. So the character Laura, it was the same actress, digital actress, that was in the other games. It's just an absolutely crazy game. I think it was one of the only games that I ever imported back in the day for the Dreamcast, and I imported it because I'd just seen so much about it, that it was so weird and bizarre and horrific. And there was the whole controversy with the censorship between the Japanese and the American versions, where they cut out a lot of the tentacle stuff for the American audience. Some pretty grotesque stuff as well, as I recall at the time, which was fair. But yeah, it's just there's not. I don't think I've ever played a game like it, and there's not been one since that I've ever played, because it's a Japanese game set in the Canadian wilderness with an American main character. It tries to be kind of has a slight American sensibility to it in some regards, but then it kind of goes way overboard with Japanese stuff, like the tentacle stuff, the alien stuff, the mutants, whatever you want to call them, whatever they are, aliens, I'm pretty sure. And then you've got I feel like I'm rambling, but it's because it's such like Illbead by the sounds of it. It's just so bloody crazy. Yeah. It's difficult to. You've got like the mechanic for hunting and killing enemies. You've got to have to barbecue things that you kill. Then you've got the outdoor exploration, which is like a regular third person kind of running around exploration. Then you go indoors and it's first person exploration.
You've got like RPG random battles as well, which are first person shooter segments.
Yes. Then you have to like press the triggers to like turn around and stuff. Like you can't turn, you have to like press something to turn. Yeah, they come behind you and everything.
Yeah, exactly. You're hitting the nail on the head there, Andrew. That's a very good description, actually. But to someone who's not played it, they might just think, what the hell are they talking about? Because it is that ridiculous. But in a way, I think, there's a lot of games that have tried to be a lot of things. Maybe in, for example, music, there might be a band that tries to mix too many genres and they just don't do it correctly. But I feel like with D2, it's pretty harmless as far as its attempt to mix things. I feel I've definitely played worse as far as it is fairly successful in what it does, I think. I'd say. And it's quite funny that I can't remember who it was who mentioned Shenmue, or maybe none of you did. Maybe it was Illbleed who mentioned Shenmue. Anyway, it was quite funny because Games Master said on Twitter recently put up this screen grab of a Game Master issue that reviewed D2, and they said D2's potential full-on brilliance is tempered by its shortage of gameplay, its linearity, and its overt lack of humour. Get Shenmue instead. And one of our followers has said, what a stupid comparison. D2's gameplay is great compared to other horror games. And I've got to agree with that guy. I think he's spot on. I think there's just something quite unique about this. I like how varied and immersive it is. I love the exploration. I mean, I think that was one of the things that Games Master article had a gripe about. It's like, you're trekking around for ages and it's just really slow. I personally really liked walking around. It felt really immersive. You go inside and it feels kind of like almost like you're out of the cold. Like it has this kind of very cozy feeling to it, like when you go inside a cabin. And the music and the sound design is amazing in that regard for immersion. I'm going to say that word a lot. Immersion. Yeah, I know a lot of people don't really like the cut scenes drag on a lot. I personally have no gripes with it. I think I like slow bits, like maybe like when Laura picks up an item, it will play this whole little scene where she'll pick it up and look at it. Just stuff like that kind of slows the gameplay down, I think. But if you're okay and you're kind of patient with that style of game, you're going to have a good time. If you like Shenmue, you're probably going to like D2.
Yeah, that's fair to say. And the story is pretty enthralling as well. That kind of pulls the whole thing together. You want to see what happens at the end. Like there were times where I was really struggling with the gameplay. Like as much as I can appreciate it now, I think at the time I struggled with it a little bit. But the story pulled me through, and I was like, I have to get through it to see what happens at the end, because it's just so weird and bizarre. I need to know what happens, and I did, and I was really pleased that I stuck with it. But one game that I don't know if anybody's played this, one game that gives me those vibes, but maybe without the weirdness to it, is a game called The Long Dark, which is on PCs and consoles. I don't know if anybody's ever seen
played that.
Brilliant game.
Great game.
And it gives it's the exploration that it has to it, and the fact you feel like you're out in the you're out in the Canadian wilderness in that as well, and you're out in the cold, and you have to, what you were saying, Lewis, about then coming into indoor locations and feeling a bit safer and a bit more cozy. it just reminded me of that. So if you want to play something similar, it's not the same. It's not really a horror game. It's more like a survival game. But if you want to play something with kind of the slight spirit of D2 to it, then The Long Dark is probably where to go. But D2, I don't think has ever had. There's never been anything like it since, and I think that's because, unfortunately, as you mentioned, Kenji Eno died quite young, and I don't think he's been ever able to. There's nobody else who could match his weird, bizarre vision for games. So, yeah.
We'll say as well is that Enemy Zero on Saturn was a fantastic game as well. I really liked Enemy Zero on Saturn. Again, a game which is sort of quite polarizing, and it's not necessarily the best made game in the world, but his vision was really good. I think it's all those games were really interesting games if you want to sort of explore the sort of slightly weirder and slightly more off-center style of gaming of the late 90s. It's really interesting.
One of the things I found really interesting about this game is you can really tell when it was made, because there's all these references to the late 90s. Like, there's this whole encyclopedia in the start menu about cloning and Dolly the sheep and all these like different things. And I actually sat there and I read all of these little archives, these glossaries of like different things. And like you could tell that Kenji Eno was really trying to make some really mega intricate, like, Kojima kind of story with this. Like, he was really trying to say something. Not quite sure what he was trying to say, really, but no. I like the story nonetheless.
Yeah.
Last thing about D2 from me is, I don't know what you guys thought about how the protagonist was silent. Like, what did you think of that as a concept, for her just not say anything at all?
It's something that you see a lot these days, especially in open world games. People, you just have a completely silent protagonist. It's less so these days, I suppose, but it has been a big factor. In D2, I think it works exceptionally well because you've already got this massive feeling of isolation. You're in this, out in the wilderness, basically, and having a character that can't put a voice to that, it means that you're having to put the voice to that. You're having to think, oh crap, this is really isolating. You don't have that person saying, well, this is weird, this is bizarre, or I feel really alone and isolated. You're having to feel that yourself. So I think it was quite inspired to have her have no voice at all. That's what I think about it.
I agree. I think looking at using a modern example, the Fallout games, the Fallout 4 was a great game, but the fact you were voiced always made me feel a little bit less immersed in the game. Fallout 3 in New Vegas, you were sort of just in the game, and I think it's sometimes it's great to have full voice acting in games, but for me, occasionally it will kill. Something like Shenmue didn't kill a game for me, because I think you were living a character. I know you are living a character, you are living Laura's life in D2, but it's slightly different in terms of the fact that it's you want that isolation, as Andrew said. It works quite well.
I think one of the weird, kind of interesting things that they did with the silent protagonist in D2 is, unlike another game, there maybe just be a silent protagonist, they never say anything, and that's that. That's, so you can put your own kind of feelings on the character. They're kind of like an avatar for yourself. But in D2, there's one bit, and I'm not going to kind of spoil what happens, but there's one bit where Laura's been silent the entire game, but something really dreadful happens and she just screams her lungs out. And I felt that. She has not spoken the entire game, and we finally saw how much she's reacted to something. And that was like a really memorable moment about D2. There's a lot of memorable moments, but I just remember that always sticks with me. I was like, that's really cool how they kind of subverted expectations. It's just the silent protagonist, and then suddenly we actually see her show this kind of level of emotion. I thought it was really good. Okay, so any more to add about D2? I feel like we've discussed it quite a lot here.
Yeah,
I think we have. There's a lot to say about it.
Get D2 if you haven't already.
Yes,
but
definitely do.
Kind of like going back to before, we're mentioning games going up in price. I feel like Illbleed and D2 are kind of those games that are getting a little bit hefty in the price range. So get them while you can. So I've kind of linked these next two together because they're basically the same game, but we're going to have a big debate about which one we prefer. And so 4 and 5, we have House of the Dead 2 with 7.9%, and then number 5, Typing of the Dead at 6.7%. So it seems like there was a little bit of a tussle to which of these was the better House of the Dead game. Obviously, everyone knows House of the Dead 2.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's like one of the most famous arcade light gun games, you know. So, guys, I'm sure we've all played it, whether it be in the arcade or on the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
Which is better, House of the Dead 2 or Typing of the Dead?
Typing of the Dead. It's the greatest video game ever made. I will stick my, apart from Micro Machines 2, going off topic, but it is the greatest game ever made. It's I played it on a PC back in like when it came out. There was a PC version. There was a demo on one of the PC Gamer discs. I loved it then. I love it now. I've played it at about every single convention I've ever gone to. Someone's always had Typing of the Dead going, and I've always played it. It is a fantastic game. It's just so. It's such an obviously weird concept that works so brilliantly. It takes the entire plot of House of the Dead 2, and it just sticks it into a game as a typing tutor, and it works better than anyone should ever think it did. It's just fantastic. It's maybe it's because I'm better at typing than I am at shooting guns. Maybe I don't know. It's just fantastic. It's so joyous as a game. You get these games on Dreamcast, especially where we've got quite a few games with weird controllers. The fishing rod controllers. We've got the train controller. Really weird games that are just elevated because of the fact they got controllers. And the same with Typing of the Dead. It's just joyous to play. I've never met anyone who, if I show them my Dreamcast stuff, if they see Typing of the Dead, they don't immediately want to play it and then immediately love it. Fantastic game.
Yeah, I personally prefer Typing of the Dead. Same as Mike, I prefer the keyboard. I'm a better typist than I am a shooter, I suppose. I'm pretty crap with light gun games, as much as I do really like them. It's sadly one of those things that has died with the move to HD TVs. Yeah, I love it. It's a great way of learning to touch type, and it's the best game where you can kill a zombie by typing Smeghead. So
yes,
there are some weird things that it makes you type out. You're just there like half the time wondering why it's asking you to type some of these phrases. Mark, Typing of the Dead, have you had a chance to play this?
I have actually, yeah. So I had this on a dodgy copy that worked on my Dreamcast a long time ago, and so I love both games. I really do. I think I just slightly prefer House of the Dead 2 only because my childhood was basically that of my friends with two light guns just going around and just basically playing that game over and over and over. So it's just a nostalgia factor. But it's similar to what you guys said. So one of the ways I actually got my girlfriend into Dreamcast was by showing her Typing of the Dead. And she was obsessed with it. And then we went to play Expo Blackpool last year, Mike, and obviously you and Tom was there. Yeah. And she saw it there, and then I lost her for about 3 hours to it there. and then since we've come home and she's took the Dreamcast to hers a few times, and she's took Typing of the Dead, and it's it's one of those games where anyone can jump on it, and you don't really the House of the Dead storyline is one thing, but just the fact that you're playing it by typing, anyone who can type a keyboard can immediately jump on and be as good as anyone else. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
What a game.
What about you, Andrew?
Typing of the Dead is one that I've always wanted to play. It's just I've never had the opportunity to. I missed out on Dreamcast, and then I think it came out on Steam, and then I don't know if it's come out on anything else, but yeah, I just ended up I think when it came out on Steam, it was just about my PC at the time was dying, so there was absolutely no point in me getting it. No. So I've just missed out on it. I've never played it, but I have played House of the Dead 2. I think I got it at the time when it came in the big box with the official light gun. Which was awesome. This huge box that you get from the shop. It was it was huge, but it had the full House of the Dead 2 cover on the front of it, and the slipcase that came in. That was pretty cool. But that I think, and I got a third party light gun, and me and my friend would just play it for hours. No good at it, terrible at it. I'm terrible at light gun games. But I loved the fact that you could play this arcade quality shooting game in your living room or in your bedroom, wherever you had your Dreamcast. And it was, fair enough, anybody who's ever played it knows how terrible the voice acting is. How
it's amazing.
overwrought. I mean, yeah, it's one of those. It's so bad it's good, isn't it?
Yeah,
you have to laugh at it.
It just totally adds to it, doesn't it? Like just how horrendously bad it is. I love it.
Like the big baddie in it, he's just like, I am Goldman, ha 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 ha. Like, he's like, he's not a very intimidating an antagonist at all.
It's a complete B movie, isn't it? It's just like Illbleed, complete.
Yeah.
B movie. I think what makes Typing of Dead even weirder as well is that you go around with the keyboard strapped, with the Dreamcast strapped to your back, and a keyboard in front of you. It just elevates the game to a level of utter weirdness that is just fantastic.
I mean.
Oh, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, that's literally Sega in this period, though, isn't it? There's no other company that was doing stuff anywhere near as weird as the shit that Sega actually got away with in that time. It's awesome. We did lose a bit of Sega, during the aftermath of going third party when they kind of got rid of a lot of people, and they've never quite had the same mentality since. I mean, obviously they're still fantastic and they're still my favourite game company of all time. But yeah, that era was just insane, wasn't it?
I think the thing is, like, as you say, it is the really weird time. You think of games like Crazy Taxi and Space Channel 5 and Typing of the Dead, House of the Dead. No one who ever thinks of those games ever has any other reaction than just smile about the game. It's one of those. I've never known anyone to say, "Oh, I don't like Crazy Taxi" because it's like, I hate it. No one ever says that. Same with Space Channel 5 and same with House of the Dead. You can't hate the game. It's just really, it's just a fun, old style game. No pretensions of being, a AAA title like we do nowadays. It's just literally go out there, shoot zombies with a gun with the most awful dialogue ever written by a human being, and it's just fantastic game.
Yeah, it's not just that the dialogue itself was terrible. It's the way that it came across. It was when I was playing Shenmue 3 earlier. One thing that struck me is how, and sorry, I'm going slightly into Shenmue 3, and we're not talking about that today. But one thing that struck me was that all of the NPCs sound like proper voice acted people. Like, it doesn't sound like somebody's taken a tape recorder out into the street and asked some random person to read a line, and like in the original ones. And that's exactly how House of the Dead 2 was as well. It felt like they just pulled in a random person off the street and go, please read this. Doesn't matter if you can act, just read it. And that's, I think that's a sign of the times as much as anything, is that I don't think they cared at the time. The Japanese game studios were like, fuck it, we want an English voice actor, let's just pull anybody off the streets. It doesn't matter what they sound like.
I think the thing as well is that Sega knew how bad it was when they released Overkill on the Wii, which is an absolutely fantastic game, which also got turned into the type-in. I don't know what it was called, Type-in of the Overkill. That was not right, but they turned that into a type-in version as well. That was deliberately done like a sort of Quentin Tarantino film, where it was overly swearing and deliberately done because they knew exactly what fans loved about House of the Dead. It was just this. Even though it was, as you said, Japanese company just wanted to have a voice actor, didn't really care who it was on there, and the translation wasn't really the most important thing. People loved it because of that, and if you look back at that kind of period of gaming, something like House of the Dead is just that really weird. I can't talk about. I love House of the Dead too, although I said Typing of the Dead was my favorite game of all time. House of the Dead is also a fantastic game, and it's House of the Dead 3 as well, and House of the Dead 1 while we're here.
But yeah, like, I mean, in terms of kind of voiceover actors, like even Corey Marshall, obviously fantastic, who did Rio in Shenmue, but I mean even that was quite wooden as a delivery, and I mean he says on one of the old DreamPods actually about like, that's kind of what they asked him to do. Like they asked him to kind of tone it down and be kind of a little bit more. Like almost like like the Japanese culture is a little bit more kind of calm and that kind of thing. So rather than reacting, obviously as kind of one of us might do and kind of scream and shout about something, it's kind of I see and all that stuff. It's kind of like that was just the thing, was it? It's kind of looking back, it's really odd.
I think Sega just had like a cage of bad voice actors and they just put them on them. Has anyone ever played Confidential Mission?
Yeah.
Imagine like a guy doing a really awful impression of James Bond. It is hilarious. Yeah, kind of going off topic, but yeah, if you haven't played or seen that awful voice acting in Confidential Mission, just check it out on YouTube. It is a treat. Yeah, Mike,
great game as well. Great game.
Yeah, good game. Yeah, great game. Mike, you were going to say something. I'm sorry to cut you off.
Not really. Put me on the spot now. I can't remember what I was going to say. My mind goes that fast. But no, I think we'll say the Japanese voice acting. I don't know what the Japanese voice acting on House of the Dead 2 was like. I don't know whether they'd had the English voice acting for the Japanese game or not. But obviously a lot of games had much better Japanese voice acting. One thing that does annoy me a little bit is when people sort of say that Shenmue is an awful game because of the voice acting. The Japanese voice acting is really good. You can understand Japanese, so I'm told. But it's House of Dead 2, I think, was deliberately done. I imagine even the original was deliberately done to be that sort of B-movie, slightly weird game, because it's memorable. You know what I mean? Would we be talking about House of the Dead 2 quite so much if it wasn't so weird, if it was just a straight-ahead shooter? We wouldn't do. Who talks about Confidential Mission? Confidential Mission, in my opinion, is a better game than House of the Dead 2. It's a better light-gun shooter, but actually, no one talks about it because, well, why would you? It's just a normal, slightly generic sort of thing. House of the Dead 2 is just weird.
I think I once got into this big debate on like the Dreamcast Junkyard Facebook group, and the guy the guy got really heated. I wasn't even like being like attacking him or anything. I just kind of thought, I was like, oh, you know, like House of the Dead, like, man, that's some bad voice acting. He was like, oh, don't you know that it's supposed to sound like a B movie? And I'm like, well, at the time, maybe I've kind of more warmed to the idea that maybe it wasn't on purpose. But at the time, I remember being like, yeah, but like, why would they do that? Like, because no one other than the B movie fans would get it. And we had this big debate, and he got really angry at me, and I think that was that. But yeah, so I think I kind of, now I'm sort of getting a little bit older, I'm kind of starting to think, yeah, maybe it was intentional. Like, how can you be that bad unintentionally? I don't know. Okay, well, those are the top 5, and we do have a few others, and we can do a little bit of a quick fire thing, go through them dead quick.
Okay.
You know, so other games, this one got quite a few votes. Blue Stinger. So we've talked about Ill Bleed. I think it was the same studio, same guy behind it. What can we say about Blue Stinger?
I don't think it's aged fantastic as a game. I mean, I did like it back in the day. I've not played it for so long, but yeah, I mean, I can definitely see why it's on there.
It's not my favourite. I got last time we moaned about Blue Stinger, we had hate mail. I'm very adverse. I've had hate mail from Shenmue fans because I even though I love Shenmue, and I've also had hate mail from Blue Stinger fans. I don't know why. Seems to have. I think everyone played it because it was one of the few games that was different when the Dreamcast first came out. So I think everyone has a nostalgia about it, but it isn't really that great a game. The Japanese version is worse because they reworked it for the Western release. The camera's all over the place. Japanese.
Okay, because I've heard this debate about the Japanese version versus the Western release. I believe the music different, or am I just
possibly?
Yeah, I feel like maybe the Japanese version has like really ridiculous orchestrated soundtrack. Is that, I don't know.
I think sounds right, because that's the kind of thing which I think Blue Stinger was known for, sort of being slightly ambitious, let's say.
Okay. Well,
awful opening movie as well. The opening movie of that game is one of the worst opening movies. So ludicrous.
Yeah, I mean, like that's kind of one of the things where that I meant by it's not aged well, because you kind of watch that and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I feel like maybe Ill Bleed had the better balance of tackiness and good gameplay, perhaps. We're not going to say too much. We don't want Mike to get hate mail again, or any of us for that matter. So we don't want to be guilty by association. So okay. So next up, we're going back to Resident Evil. We've got Resident Evil 2. This is a game that's recently been remade. How do we feel about going back to the Dreamcast version, considering the new remake has been hailed as amazing by everyone?
I don't think that means that the old version is any less good. I think it's its own thing, and especially if you played it back in the day, it's always going to have that nostalgia for you. That playing the original version, because they did a lot different with the remake. It's kind of like it's very similar to when they remade Resident Evil 1, and they changed quite a lot of it, and so actually it became a game of its own. And fair enough, the remake of the first game it makes the original original Resident Evil kind of fade into the background quite significantly in comparison, and nobody wants to play the original Resident Evil anymore. That's why you don't get that ported anywhere, apart from the PlayStation Classic that nobody bought. And I don't. But the thing is, they still have their places. Like, I would still like to play Resident Evil Director's Cut every now and again, just to remember how that was. That's the game that got me into Resident Evil, and the same is true for Resident Evil 2 for me. I'd still go back and play that, and the Dreamcast version is arguably one of the better. I think probably that and the GameCube version, which I think the GameCube version was based on the Dreamcast version. So I think that those two versions are the best that you can get. And it's just a great game. Expensive now to buy on the Dreamcast. Same with Resident Evil 3. You'd be lucky to find it for under 50 quid, I think. But worthwhile still.
What about you, Mark? Are you a fan of Resident Evil 2?
Yeah, massively. Yeah. So, I think I mentioned before, it's definitely one of my favorite horror games, just generally. So I didn't have the Dreamcast version originally. Kind of like when I actually had a Dreamcast, and that's purely because I still had the game on PS1 at the time. I've since bought it and played it in the last couple of years, and it's a great game. But I think we all know that Resident Evil 2 is probably just generally seen as one of the best horror games of all time, just anyway, which is kind of testament to how well the remake's gone over recently. So absolutely no arguments. I think it definitely probably had a shout of being in my top 5, certainly. I think I would have been a lot higher just in my personal poll. But yeah, it's a fantastic game. No arguments from me whatsoever.
Mike, you mentioned you weren't the biggest Resident Evil fan. What do you think of Resident Evil 2?
I don't like the way the Resident Evil games, the first two, play.
Right.
But as a horror game, it's a proper. The bit where you walk through the very bit of the game for police station that it goes past the window lives in my memory from many years ago. I actually had it. I actually bought a PS. I was a PC gamer, and I actually bought a PS1. Me and my brother bought a PS1 to play this game, and we took it back the next day because it was such a jump down from being a PC gamer to playing the PS1. So in my mind, Resident Evil 2 sort of slightly tarred by that brush, but it's a great game. Going back now and playing, I've played it in the last few years. It's a good game, but it's for me, it's just a bit. If you weren't into it at the time, it's difficult to now get into it.
Okay, well, we've got a few more. We can just skip over these pretty quick. Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare.
Great game.
Yeah.
Great game.
Yeah.
Great game. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any quick fire sentences for Alone in the Dark?
Really good lighting effects. Reminds me a little bit of Luigi's Mansion 3, which I'm playing at the current time. They're really, really cool for the hardware it's on. The lighting effects are really, really good.
Okay, nice. Yeah. So next up, we've got kind of not really a survival horror game, just kind of a creepy game, Shadow Man. What do we think of Shadow Man?
Yeah, I remember this kind of back in the day. So I didn't have it, but my cousin who lived like 5 doors down had it, and we played it. And yeah, that was one of the ones that like I say, creepy is very much the word with that one. That was I remember that really, really vividly because it's it was one of those games where I was like, it's cool and there's a lot going on, but I really like the kind of atmosphere that they built around it. I thought it was pretty cool. Okay,
Mike, what do you think of Shadow Man?
Yeah, cool game. I've had on the PC on release. Still got the big box version. Really good. It's not anything particularly special, but yeah, cool.
Yeah, it's quite it's memorable at least. I think I always loved the front cover of it. Always stood out to me. Like I think I saw an advert on the back of a magazine like years ago when it came out, and I was thinking that's a cool looking game. What about you, Andrew? You played Shadow Man?
I vaguely remember it, so it was okay, but I don't remember it well enough to have a huge opinion of it. It was all right.
Okay, am I right in saying that it came out on the N64 as well? I think that one.
Yeah.
Okay, well, there's one here that I believe, Andrew, you are a fan of, and that is Carrier. What can you tell us about Carrier?
Ooh, I am a fan of it, but weirdly, I never got to play very much of it because if I remember rightly, it came out in the UK, but it was really limited, and I can't remember how I managed to play it. I don't think I ever had my own copy, but I managed to play it somehow. And now trying to find a UK copy, at least a PAL copy, is you can find them, but you'd be paying a lot for them. But in terms of the actual game itself, so it's a game that takes place on an aircraft carrier, and you're called in, and you basically something's gone wrong. So it's a 3D game. It's very much it's kind of like in a Code Veronica vein in terms of the graphics, but then I think I remember a lot of fixed camera angles in it, if I remember rightly. And lots of horrific monsters that you have to fight. It's very dark. I remember it being very dark, and it kind of came across to me. It was like a mixture of Code Veronica, a little bit of Dino Crisis, which probably should mention as well because that's an awesome port on the Dreamcast of Dino Crisis. But yeah, it had that kind of clinical scientific research facility feel because it was this mechanical aircraft carrier thingy. But anyway, yeah, it was a good game from what I played of it. And I think I spoke about it recently on another podcast I was on. It gave me. I haven't played this game either, but I've seen a lot of it. It gave me feelings of Deep Fear from the Saturn.
Yeah.
Very much like that. It was almost like a spiritual successor to it in a lot of ways, I think, in terms of the location and the type of horror game it was. It was just a very I was going to say it's a very unique horror game. It was actually quite a derivative horror game, but for the Dreamcast, there wasn't very many other horror games like it. And I think it probably deserved a little bit more love than it got. Okay,
what about you guys? What do you think of Carrier?
I've never played it at all, and I thought I owned it. I've just had a quick look across the shelves there, and I actually don't own it at all. So I've seen bits, and I've seen kind of online stuff. I can't say I've got much of an opinion of it really, but obviously I'll certainly take your word for it.
What about you guys?
I was convinced I owned that, but it's not here, so I'm assuming I don't.
Right, Mike, what do you think of Carrier?
Yes, again, I've got a slight problem with fixed sort of perspective games, so it's not going to be my highest on my list. But yeah, so it does what it does. It's a bit like Dino Crisis. It's sort of you play it and sort of think, oh, it's like Resident Evil. That's why I play it anyway.
Right, we all very much loved House of the Dead. We liked Typing of the Dead very much.
Yeah.
What do we think of Zombie Revenge, which is a House of the Dead spin-off?
Great game. It mixes two of the best games on Dreamcast. It mixes House of the Dead and it mixes Dynamite Cop, and it's a really good beat 'em up, which was a genre which really should have done more on the Dreamcast. It's just a really good. It's not the most sophisticated game in the world. It's not the most advanced game in the world, but it's just good fun.
Yeah, I picked this one up from Japan because the PAL copy is a little bit climbing in price. Mm-hmm. If you have no gripes of having the Japanese copy, it's all in English. All the text is in English.
Yep.
So I was I think I just got it just because I thought this will be a game that I can play without knowing Japanese, and then just discovered that it's all in English anyway. So win-win. So yeah, I really love it. I think the Dreamcast is a fantastic console for couch party co-op games. Yep. This is one of them. This is a great one. Just press start and you're there playing with your friends. So yeah, it's like you say, it's like Dynamite Cop, another fantastic game. And it mixes the campiness of House of the Dead, the terrible voice acting. It's perfect. Yeah, it's a cool game. What about you guys? Mark, have you played Zombie Revenge?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so this is one I loved and actually own myself, and yeah, this is like I say, very very similar to House of the Dead in terms of some of the gameplay. Obviously, I mean it's not an on-rail shooter, but you can see the similarities very much so. I absolutely love this as a kid, and it's one I actually do pull off the shelf every now and then. It's like I still go back to it and play it now.
Yep.
What about you, Andrew? Zombie Revenge. What do you think?
It's one that I never played. I don't own it, and as you said, it's very expensive to buy now. But now you've mentioned that the Japanese version is completely playable in English, then I think I'm going to get it. I mean, I've looked at it doing research for the book. I was looking at games like Dynamite Cop and obviously Zombie and House of the Dead 2, and obviously Zombie's Revenge came up. Zombie Revenge. I really want to play it. It looks great. It looks campy and fun, and it just looks great. And I wish I'd already played it, but I haven't. So I'm going to go find a Japanese copy, I think.
You'll love it, mate. It is really good.
Excited.
Okay, so we discussed this a little bit. Dino Crisis. I've never played this one. What do you guys think of Dino Crisis? Yeah. What do you think specifically of the Dreamcast port?
Port's alright. I think from what I remember, the port's alright. It's as Andrew said. I think it's a decent port. PC. I think it's port of the PC version, though, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a great port. I mean, I mean, obviously, if you have the PC and you speaking about PC gaming earlier, Mike, and how it's generally better because better graphics and stuff like that. Yeah. So if you've got the PC version, great, fantastic. But I think it's I don't think it's easy to get hold of now. So if you play consoles, the Dreamcast version is the best version to get. It just looks good. It's very it really benefits from the Dreamcast's clearness, the clarity of the images that Dreamcast had as opposed to the PS1. The PS1 was quite murky and muddy in terms of textures and stuff like that. And when they ported it to the Dreamcast, all of a sudden it was like it was like a night and day for me anyway. But it's a fantastic game. And you were saying, Mike, it's basically just it's Resident Evil with dinosaurs kind of. Yeah. But I've had this conversation. I think again another podcast another time. It's so much more than that. Like, I bought this game thinking it was Resident Evil with dinosaurs, took it home, however old I was, like 16 at the time, and I spent my own like part-time job money on it, and I was gutted because it was nothing like Resident Evil with dinosaurs. It was a completely different game, and I nearly took it back. I was that like angry about the fact that it wasn't what it was advertised to be. But it was kind of like 5-6 o'clock in the evening. The shop had shut, so I was like, oh fuck it, I'll give it another try. Yeah. And I did, and I loved it because it is different. There's so much difference to it, and it's much more to do with the suspense and the tension than it is about the jump scares or the horror. And I think that's what sets it apart from other games in that genre, and that's what sets it apart from Resident Evil as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I first played it on PS1, and then I think I owned it on PS1, but then played it at my friend's house, like I said, a few doors down, who had it on Dreamcast, and yeah, it was like you say, it's kind of night and day in terms of the graphics. It's I mean, you can say this about a lot of the kind of games of that era that were then ported to the Dreamcast. Like I said earlier, it's just kind of everything's just turned up to 11. That's the best way I can describe it. It's the same game, just better, pretty much.
Yep.
Okay, well, I think just for time, might just skip over to the joke vote. So some people did vote.
Before you go on, very, very quickly, I must mention Desperia, Japanese-only horror game. Yeah. Dreamcast Collector does a blog, follower of our website, been helping with the A to Z guide as well. He's a massive fan of this game. I have to say that I couldn't really get into it because you need to have knowledge of Japanese, and I do not have knowledge of Japanese. It is one of the weirdest and trippiest games I've played. It's trippier than Illbleed. It's really bizarre, but it's meant to be really, really good. Really good reviews. If you do know Japanese, I think you probably know about it already. There are guides online. They're not the best guides in the world, it has to be said. But it's definitely worth checking out if you're into really weird horror games.
Yeah, I actually looked it up because I was looking at horror games on the Dreamcast when I made the poll, and I looked that game up, and I just watched like a clip of it on YouTube, and I just thought, it's not even like the insanity of Illbleed, it's like really unsettlingly strange. Like it has that kind kind of Japanese horror, like The Ring,
exactly,
or The Grudge, or something, and I think that's what makes it really kind of alien and different.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Player,
exact reason, because it's a completely, for people in the West, it's a different cultural thing, and so we have no sort of relevance to other things. It makes it really, really weird. But I know a lot of people who live in Japan, who are from the West. They love the game, so I think it's something which definitely, if you're learning Japanese, you're getting into Japanese gaming, I definitely pick up.
Yeah, I think that we should raise more awareness for it, because it would be quite an interesting game to get a translation of. So, community, if you're hearing this. Just want to comment on the fact that Resident Evil 3 Nemesis got a total of 2 votes. So
good.
Yeah, I don't get that. That's.
Did you say good there, Mike?
I did. Yeah.
How dare you? How dare you?
I just want to ask, actually, this was something I should have said a little bit earlier. What did everyone vote for? And if you didn't vote, if you missed the poll, just pretend you did vote, so we don't pick on anyone here. So, Mike, what did you vote for in the poll?
I'm pretty sure I voted for Illbleed. even though Typing of the Dead is a better game for me, Illbleed is the best horror game. I think the best horror game I've probably ever played in terms of just of what I love about horror, the B-movie side.
What about you, Mark? What would you have voted for? Did you vote for?
So House of the Dead for me. Even though I think Resident Evil Code Veronica's a better game overall, but just in terms of my nostalgia and kind of what I've loved that's kind of in and around the genre, definitely House of the Dead for me.
Okay, and what about you, Andrew? What was your choice on this list?
I'm pretty sure I voted for Code Veronica for obvious reasons, the fact that it brought me to the Dreamcast. But I think D2 would have been. I think I was a bit torn because that is, to me, possibly the better example on the system. But yeah, Code Veronica for sure.
I personally voted for D2. I expected it to get votes, but I kind of thought I'd help it a little because I really did want to talk about it, as you probably can see from the amount of blabbering I did about it. So we did have a little bit on the end, which was like a other section, and you could type your own answer. And I'm just going to read out some of the ones we got.
I bet I know at least one.
Okay, go for it, Mike.
I'm hoping at least someone who follows Dreamcast Junkyard has voted for Spirit of Speed.
Yes, there was
of course.
One vote for Spirit of Speed.
And to be fair, it's
from Tom Charnock.
Yeah.
Or Kev, maybe, I'm not sure. We also got a vote for Seaman as well, which
is terrifying.
Kind of creepy, We tweeted out a picture earlier, kind of, to advertise our recording of this podcast tonight. And we snuck Seaman in the corner just for a visual gag. And I'm hoping everyone understood the joke and didn't just be like, why did they put Seaman on there? They don't know what they're talking about.
I think we had some unfollows.
Damn, right. There's also someone voted for, and I kind of looked it up and it looked quite interesting. It's a mod of Half-Life for the Dreamcast.
Paranoia?
They Hunger trilogy.
Oh, yeah. Excellent, yeah.
Okay, I've never heard of this before.
So all of the Half-Life PC mods, or a lot of them have been converted, so you can use them on Dreamcast, download them and play them. I've got a few. Paranoia is another really good horror style one. But yeah, They Hunger is a fantastic game. Yeah, a lot of the Half-Life mods in the PC community were really, really good. Right the way up to Half-Life 2 came out. And you can get them on Dreamcast. They play really, really well. I've played all the way through Paranoia on Dreamcast. Paranoia, I think Paranoia is a Russian made game. You've got They Hunger, you've got a couple others as well, a couple of other non-horror ones, but definitely if you're into getting some downloadable titles for Dreamcast, get some Half-Life mods. They're fantastic.
Nice.
And just quickly to finish off, is there any Dreamcast horror game that's not been mentioned today that you want to plug? Mike, you had Desperia, and is there any others you want to mention?
Nightmare Creatures 2.
Yes, I realised we put that on the list and I accidentally skipped over it. What do you want to say about Nightmares Creatures 2?
It's crap.
Okay. So you just want to dunk on it, basically?
No, it's not crap enough to be bad. It's just really, really average. It looks quite poor. Bit of clipping. It's very, very dark. It's not as good as the first game was on the PlayStation. If anyone's really interested in a really sort of in-depth review of it, Hardcore Gaming 101 do a really, really good in-depth review. It's also in their horror game book that they released, but really, really good review of it. It's an okay game in bits, but it's just one of those games where you just think, it's a PS1 game. Shouldn't really be on Dreamcast.
Okay, any others that you guys want to mention, Mark, Andrew?
Yeah, well, I kind of did a bit of a jokey Halloween horror special, and I put South Park Rally in there. That game. My God, I mean, everything should work on paper. It's a kart racer. One of my favourite genres with South Park. One of my favourite shows. How did they mess that up so much? I don't understand. I just don't understand how is it possible? Like, who sat down and managed to balls that up? It's almost incredible. But yeah, that's that'll be on there for me.
What about you, Andrew? Any others that we haven't mentioned?
I think one that always comes to mind when we talk about horror games for the Dreamcast is The Ring Terror's Realm, which looks... I mean, I've never played it. I'm a huge fan of the Ring movies, both the Japanese and the American ones, but the game kind of passed me by, and I've only found out about it later. but it's like a Resident Evil style game. But apparently, like just looking at Wikipedia about it, the best quote I found about it on Wikipedia was a pretty depressing homage to The Ring. So apparently it's terrible.
This is one that I would have mentioned myself, actually. Coincidentally, I'm actually seeing The Ring tomorrow. They're doing a showing of the Japanese version at a cinema near me, so that's pretty cool. Awesome. If you want to know more about The Ring Terror's Realm, there is a YouTuber who I used to be a big fan of he's kind of stopped making videos these days, but he's called Spoony, and he had a review of this game, and it's an absolutely fantastic review. You need to watch it. Like, the voice acting, the scripting is dreadful. And it's kind of like what Mike said, that the Japanese horror is, it's a really great, terrifying basis for a game. And they took The Ring and they screwed it up so badly.
The game playing with The Ring made me feel like if you were playing Shenmue without any of the fun parts and just doing the job bits. Wow. Because it's just literally, it's like working in an office. I remember playing The Ring and just feeling like I've had to work an entire day in an office. I don't know why. Yeah. It's set in an office. I've not made a random thing, but it's just so boring. I love The Ring, and this is just, it's such a boring game.
There's just like one bit in the review that Spoony does where at the beginning she comes home to find her like boyfriend is dead, and he's been like hauled away into a hospital, to the morgue. And like she breaks down, starts crying, and this cop just says in this really like wooden voice, "You okay, lady?" like this, and it's just the worst thing you've ever heard. She's there breaking down, and he just doesn't sound like he gives a shit,
And has no relevance to The Ring either. I think we need to point this out. It really does have no relevance to the actual plot of the film.
It's like a computer program or something.
Yeah, it's a computer program. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
Isn't it based on like because the guy who wrote The Ring, the book, one of his later books was to do with a computer program. I think maybe it was based on that rather than the films.
I think possibly, perhaps. Yeah. Because I think there was different forms of medium that he wrote, didn't he? About or like one was TV, one was. I think it is to do with that, but I think that isn't explained very well in the extremely poorly written story that's in the game.
This was one that Tom actually was selling when I bought Illbleed, and I kind of wondered just to have it for the laughs, but I think that's just. In the end, I was like, nah, you can keep that one.
If Tom still has it, I'll take it. I want to see how bad this is.
I want to say like Kev bought it, but I don't know.
No, I think actually because I was with Tom when he sold his games in Bristol, and I'm pretty sure there was one guy who bought loads of American games from him, and he was talking to me about The Ring. I'm sure it was this one, and I had to tell him it was terrible. He wasn't interested. He still bought it.
I'll say maybe like it looks okay. Like it's not a bad looking game. That's the only thing I can really say. Like that's it. It's terrible. I'm glad we got to discuss this. All right. Well, I feel like we have covered pretty much the best and the worst games, horror games on the Dreamcast. So thank you for coming on, guys. Thank you for putting time aside from Shenmue 3 to come on here. It's been a lot of fun. Let's just go around and find out where we can find everyone on the internet. Mike, where can we find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at space_turnip. I'm also got a little account which posts pictures of my collection because I'm bored most of the time, which is at Dreamcast Pics. That's Pics. And also I'm on the Facebook group, and I'm sometimes take control of the Dreamcast Junkyard Twitter feed to do random things.
Okay. Mark, where can we find you?
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel called MAZ Gaming, which is MAZ Gaming. So there is a lot of Dreamcast stuff on there. There's a lot of Dreamcast stuff coming up on there as well. So please do head over and subscribe, obviously, if you're into that stuff, which I'm assuming you are if you bother in to listen to this. And also, it's just at MAZ Gaming UK on Twitter as well.
Okay. And Andrew, yourself?
A few places you can find me. At Oddment84 on Twitter, which is where you'll find things about the book. I post updates every now and again on there. You can also find me at Dreamcast Years, which is the website I set up kind of inspired by the book. And we run a podcast as well, the Dreamcast Years podcast, which has a few episodes out now. We talk about the golden years of gaming. And then finally, you can also find me at the Switch Island, where I talk about Switch things, because the Switch is awesome.
It is indeed. Really trying to get one at some point. I need to play the new Pokemon game, despite what everyone says. I'll take your word for it. Right, so you can find me on Twitter at LewisJFC. You can find me on the Junkyard as well. I do want to get back into writing on there. I've not written on there for a while, but I am kind of thinking about doing a review of the entire Power Stone anime series, because there is one. Wow. It's 26 episodes. Yep. Kind of want to watch it, and I thought, why don't I watch it so the others don't have to? So I also have a kind of geek culture website called AltMag. That's alt, ALTMAG, UK.net. That's the URL for that. It's talking about anime and games and stuff. So as for the Junkyard, you can tweet us at the DC Junkyard. We also have a Facebook page and a Facebook group. Just search Dreamcast Junkyard on Facebook. You'll find us. So tell us which of these games were your favourite if you didn't have a chance to vote in the poll. And thank you for tuning in. So, Mike, say goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
And Mark, see you later.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, see you later.
Andrew.
Cheerio.
So, thanks for listening. See you later, everyone.
No, I can't believe it's Robert. No.
You okay, lady?
Meg, what's going on over there? Like, hey, man, what's happening here?
Now, hold on a moment, sir.
I know the two of them. They're friends. What happened? I don't believe this.
Hey,